All right, greetings. Welcome back to another episode of Black Bear News, where everything is connected. Today we're going to be talking about COP29. So the first COP, or Conference of the Parties, was held in 1995 in Berlin. These are basically the conventions on trying to fix the climate, or steer us towards a livable planet. This was almost 30 years ago, and as we look around, it doesn't look like much progress has been made. In fact, things seem to be getting worse on the planet. Famously, Michael Moore's film, The Planet of the Humans, which detailed that things weren't moving in the right direction. In fact, that things were getting worse. In fact, that the green movement, or the environmental movement, was being taken over by billionaires and tech lords, and people looking to profit off of a green economy and the newly created renewables technologies. It certainly looks like a mess. So specifically today, I wanted to cover this article by Ariel Samuelson about COP29 and titled COP29 Smells Like Oil. Let's get into it. The world's largest climate summit literally smells like oil. Leaders from nearly 200 countries have come together at the United Nations Climate Summit in Baku, Azerbaijan, to strategize how to preserve a livable climate. But this year's conference has been roiled by a drama as talks grind to a halt amidst the fumes from nearby refineries driving planetary heating. For the second year in a row, the chief executive of the climate conference was caught on tape making secret deals for oil and gas. The president of Azerbaijan opened the talks by praising oil and gas as a gift from God, then started a verbal feud with France that prompted the French environment minister to boycott the talks. Ooh, drama. Only days before the conference kicked off, Donald Trump was reelected, signaling to other nations that the world's largest economy will once again pull out of the Paris Agreement, that the president-elect has called a ripoff. And more than 1 week into the talks, delegates are deadlocked as they haggle over exactly how much money they should pay to prevent dangerous levels of planetary heating. I'm going to interject here and say that I find it interesting that people who are climate aware or climate conscious, people who are concerned with climate change and all things climate, seem to be so dismayed, afraid, angry about Donald Trump's stance on the Paris Agreement, but they well know that it has been infiltrated by oil companies and big capital. And he's correct when he says it is a ripoff. It is not going to help the planet. It's woefully inadequate. They're out of step with what's actually occurring on the planet. They seem to be way behind the curve of how bad things are going in the real world. Staying in the Paris Agreement, or staying with these conference of parties and staying in this on this track doesn't seem to be helping. It seems to be hindering, and it seems to be pulling the wool over everybody's eyes. So to me, I don't really care if we pull out of the Paris Agreement. Who cares about the signaling or about the messaging? I mean, the messaging actually we should be doing something different about this, not having these yearly conferences where everybody flies in to wine and dine and make deals with oil and gas executives. Anyways, back to the article. All this drama is playing out against a backdrop of the actual crisis those 198 countries are there to solve. This year is already on track to be the hottest year on record. The world is polluting more than it ever has, and countries are feeling the consequences of deadly hurricanes, raging floods, and famine-inducing droughts. We see this all around us if you just are paying attention, if you're breathing, if you have windows in your house. But with only 2 days left, negotiators still can't agree on the most important question: how much climate funding wealthy countries are willing to give developing countries to transition away from fossil fuels. The slow progress prompted some former UN climate officials to publish a letter calling for significant reform, including barring countries that don't support the phase out of fossil fuels from hosting the summit. Other environmentalists think the COPs should be scrapped altogether because they focus too much on corporate and national interests, while doing too little to address the existential crisis. When you sit in your 10th opening statement at COP and it's all the same, it's frustrating to think that no other world is possible. Zelle Bastida, the executive director of the nonprofit Re-Earth Initiative, told Grist. Indeed, it seems like these conferences are not helping the situation. They're moving it backward. They're not instilling a lot of faith in people that these leaders and conferences and corporate leaders and Davoses and G20s and WEFs and that the UNs, they don't have any confidence that these people can get together and solve this crisis. And they're becoming jaded, cynical, if you will, about the whole subject altogether, right? So, climate change has become a very unpopular subject. People don't have a lot of faith. Not that it's not a problem, but they don't have faith that it's going to be fixed, certainly not in the ways that people are trying to fix it. And again, this goes back to the idea of people power. Instead of these global conferences that are basically pilgrimages to pray at the altar of human production and consumption, while trying to solve the problem of human production and consumption, why don't we praise the folks tending their own backyards, their own backyard gardens, people that are slowly exiting the system that was designed to keep us trapped on this never-ending consumption escalator? People who are building a new way of living, which mostly looks like old ways of living. People who are learning to be happy with less. We're having a conference of those people right now on the internet. Let's use the powerful technology of the internet to truly decentralize and defund these powerful entities. We can do this if we can stay united in the purpose and the solidarity of the common man, and sharing and cooperation as the baseline for existence, and not greed, competition, and wealth hoarding that got us here in the first place. Those are just my thoughts on it. Meanwhile, they seem to be wrapped up in the idea of who's going to finance climate change. Who's going to pay for climate change? That's the biggest question of the conference, and it's a doozy. This year, it's called the Finance COP because rich countries are getting down to brass tacks about who funds the climate transition in countries that can't afford it. This year is the year that they're talking about this? I feel like this has been every year for the last 10 years, or is it just me? Without help, poorer countries will be unable to transition away from fossil fuels, driving up emissions for the whole planet. But which countries should pay, how much, and the means by which those funds are distributed are all up for argument. Sounds like something to debate for the next 10 years while things get worse. Developing countries say that the fund should be about $1.3 trillion per year, an amount that aligns with UN-backed expert recommendations. Rich nations like the US and European Union would prefer to keep the amount closer to $100 billion a year, or 1/10, where it's been for nearly a decade since the Paris Agreement. Developing nations counter that the world has plenty of spare change to spend on fossil fuels. The reality of the situation is that the $1.3 trillion pales in the face of the $7 trillion that's spent annually on fossil fuel subsidies, said Fiji Deputy Prime Minister Biman Prasad at the conference. You have less world leaders showing up to these conferences. Saudi Arabia is trying to undercut the world's fossil fuel phase out. Of course they are. They're talking about tripling the world's nuclear power by 2050 as a response. It's a mess. It really is incumbent on us to take our own personal steps in trying to fight this problem as best we can on a local level. Thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate it. You know how to support the channel. All the links in the description box. I'll see you on the next one. Until next time, peace.